Hey everyone, my name is Matt Fina with Fina Family Cellars here in Napa Valley, and it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here today, tasting some wine, talking about my journey with cystic fibrosis and as well as double lung transplant, and just really happy and honored to share my story. So, as far as my journey with cystic fibrosis, I was actually born in 1977. As many of you know, back in the 70s, there wasn't quite as much known about cystic fibrosis as there is today. And so when I was born, my mom and dad were actually told that I wouldn't live to see my 4th birthday. That was my initial prognosis. And so being a parent myself, I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for them to hear that. But I'm very fortunate that I was born to 2 parents who were incredibly determined and disciplined and dedicated to my health, and they were just determined to see me beat that prognosis. Unfortunately, there were not any pulmonologists at the time that specialized in cystic fibrosis. So once that prognosis and diagnosis were made, my parents sought out to find a specialist who could help me better than what they had in the Fresno area. And so they found a physician right here in the Bay Area by the name of John McQuitty at Oakland Children's Hospital, who you may remember. As soon as I started seeing him, almost immediately things started to turn around for me. They got me on the right medications. They taught my parents how to do the chest physiotherapy, all of those things that we did back in the 70s and early 80s to treat this disease. Once I got sort of past that 4 or 5 year mark and got into elementary school, things started getting a lot better. I was a very active child. I was always into sports, namely Little League baseball, basketball, and I was pretty healthy most of my younger years. In college, I was very healthy. I dabbled in bodybuilding a little bit even. I really enjoyed working out in the gym, and I was in the gym quite a bit during my college years and during my 20s. And then in my early 30s, unfortunately, that's when my health started to take a bit of a downturn. As you know, CF is a progressive disease, and sadly, even if you're doing everything correct, as far as proper nutrition, working out, taking all of your medications, seeing your doctors on a regular basis, sadly it can still progress. And that's what happened with me. And that's when my medical team started talking about transplant. And so they also explained to me that in the transplant world, there's sort of a short window of opportunity in which you're eligible to receive a transplant. And they basically laid it all out for me and said, the time is now. You're in the window. We feel that you're healthy enough to receive a transplant and strong enough to survive a transplant, but you're definitely sick enough that you need a transplant. So after some long, hard discussions, we decided to move forward with going onto the transplant list. And they said, the wait for a new pair of lungs is probably about 6 months to a year. And that was a little scary to hear, because really at that point there was no guarantee that I was going to even last another 6 months or a year. One big lung infection and I could have been done. Then lo and behold, it was only 2.5 weeks. It was May 15th of 2012 that I got the call that there was a donor for me. And we were living up here in the Bay Area at that point. And so I remember it was about 6 o'clock in the morning that the physician called me and told us that there was a donor. And so we hadn't packed up any bags. We, mentally, emotionally, physically, I don't think we were prepared at that point at all. But we hopped out of bed real fast, threw some stuff in some bags and jumped in the car and made our way through the morning traffic in the Bay Area, which is not easy to navigate in by any means. But we ended up hustling our way to Stanford, and I ended up having my transplant on May 15th, 2012. Dr. Richard Ha was my surgeon. He did a fantastic job. The surgery itself was only about 5.5 hours long. They did a sternotomy on me, and the surgery went smooth. There were no complications. I ended up being in the ICU for only a day and a half. Again, me being very competitive and also a little stubborn, I wanted to get out of the ICU as quick as possible. Part of that was because at the time I had a 3-year-old daughter, and I wanted, coming out of that surgery, I wanted, more than anything, I just wanted to see her. It was really pretty quick. I remember it wasn't too long after they actually extubated me that I was actually sitting up in bed trying to get out of bed. The nurses were like, "Matt, stop, stop trying to push it so much." And I was like, no, I feel great. These lungs feel great. I'm breathing good. I'm not in any pain. So, let me see if I could stand. And so, I was very slowly progressed to standing and walking at bedside, of course, right there in the ICU. So they're like, okay, this guy doesn't need to be in the ICU. We can move him up to the step-down unit. And that's when I finally got to see Gracie again for the first time after the surgery. And I remember that was a very joyous occasion. There's lots of pictures. When she came to see me, my wife had bought her a little doctor's outfit with a white coat and a scrub cap and all that, and it was really funny and cute. And so I stayed in the step-down unit then for another 7 or 8 days, and I was discharged altogether on day 9. And then I was back in the gym working out on day 12. So it was really a pretty quick turnaround from the point that I actually had the surgery to the point where I was back living life again. As soon as they discharged me from the hospital, my mentality was, all right, let's see what these new lungs can do. Of course, I immediately, sort of began living my life with this, renewed sense of gratitude, for my donor and my donor's family, and just this whole new second chance at life, which was just amazing. For the first time, I was able to take these deep breaths in, and not even so much as being able to breathe in deeply, but being able to breathe in clearly was one of the things that I noticed almost instantly. There were other things that were also immediately noticeable that were just kind of eye-opening. For one, when I looked at my fingers, my fingernails were this nice pink and tan color, which is what they're supposed to look like. For years and years, because of my low oxygenation levels, my fingernails had sort of become this purplish blue color. But as soon as I had these new lungs, all of a sudden you could just tell all over my face, my skin color, everything, you could just tell my body was suddenly getting the proper amount of oxygen. And so again, right away, I wanted to just start working out and training. I had heard from my dear friend Isa and Anna Stenzel. They told me about the Transplant Games of America, and that sounded very, very interesting to me. And so I immediately started training for those and had my eyes set on going to the Transplant Games. I went back to work, again doing medical device sales, but right after my transplant, my doctors, they knew I was in medical device sales, and the bread and butter of my job was walking in and out of hospitals every day, going into the OR, helping out with surgeries, talking to doctors about our medical device. And as everyone knows, there's lots of germs floating around. So my doc said, Matt, don't think you should go back into that. I think maybe we should hang that up and consider another career. So I took their advice and decided to retire from the medical device world. And of course, that's what led my wife and I to have a discussion about what we should do moving forward. And owning our own winery, making our own wine, that's something that had always been a little bit of a dream of ours. And at the time, we were living right here in Napa. And so we thought, you know what? Life's too short not to chase your dreams. It's too short not to do something you absolutely love and something that's fulfilling. We saw this as something we could do together. We also had the idea that, you know what, this could be a creative outlet in a way that we could also use this as a vehicle to spread awareness of cystic fibrosis and organ donation. And so over a glass of wine one night, we decided, you know what, let's just jump right into this and make it happen. Let's launch our own winery. And so that's how the Fina Family Cellars really was born. We decided we would launch our own label and also use this as an opportunity to share my story. So on the back of every wine, you can read a short little blurb about my life with cystic fibrosis and going through transplant. But more so, we also decided that every single bottle of wine that we sell, we would set aside a percentage of that sale and end up donating to charities and patients and hospitals to assist with trials and all sorts of different ways we could allocate money to benefit other CF patients. And initially we started with just a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Chardonnay. Just figured we'd start with 2 different varietals, see how that goes. Both of those wines sold out pretty quick. Fortunately, it seemed like it was a big hit and seemed like it would be very successful, so we continued. Cabernet Sauvignon is my favorite varietal, so we wanted to continue producing a Cab. We ended up ultimately adding a Sauvignon Blanc, a Cab Franc, a Pinot Noir, a Rosé, some red blends, some white blends. We've kind of dabbled in a few different things. So our philosophy is kind of funny. Our philosophy is we're not going to produce any wines that my wife and I don't actually enjoy. So, and the purpose of that is we figure even if our business miserably fails, we'll have all this great wine that we can drink and enjoy. So, so that's been a lot of fun. And this Pinot Noir was actually born in a vineyard called Rogers Creek Vineyard, and that's over in the Petaluma Gap, which is not too far from here in the Sonoma coast. A quick little blurb on the label you can see better on this cab. So the label, I'm sure you can tell, that is designed to look like rootstock in the shape of lungs. I actually drew that label myself, just sketched it out in pencil, and then I had my graphic designer sort of invert it to sort of a white on black image, and we silk screened the first couple of bottles. We silk screened like this, so it would just be black and white, and I loved the way it looked. I thought it turned out really good. And what's kind of cool is if you look really closely, I've had some people question me about this, and they've said, oh, no way did you draw that. And I say, oh yeah, I did, and I can prove it. If you look really closely on the bottle right here, you can sort of make out the letters GFD, and those are the initials of my daughter. So I worked that in there as a tribute to my daughter, Gracie. But these labels on the Pinot, you can obviously tell it's a little different with this red background. We decided to commission Gracie. Gracie's very artistic. And so we commissioned Gracie to paint a painting for us that we could use as the sort of the background on our labels. And so this one in particular we really liked. And so this is one of Gracie's paintings in the background of this one. But this red one I thought looked really cool. To me, I thought it looked like a bunch of red blood cells. And so I was like, okay, that would be perfect for our concept. And so that's one of Gracie's paintings as well for this Pinot. I think it was a little less than 1 year after my transplant, I started having episodes of rejection. Initially, it was just acute rejection, but unfortunately, we weren't able to really get a grasp on it, and my lung function continued to decline. Ultimately, at some time in 2013, they had diagnosed me with chronic rejection. And of course, once you get to chronic rejection, it's irreversible. So that kind of shot down my idea of competing in the transplant games. I had started undergoing photopheresis treatments for my chronic rejection. And the photopheresis treatments, they were very effective at halting the progression of the chronic rejection. My decline in lung function, I basically got back down to around 30%. By 2016, things had kind of turned around a little bit. My lung function had come up just a tad, and even though it was lower, I was starting to feel a bit more in shape again. And so in 2016, I was able to go to the transplant games for the first time. And that was the first time I got to go to the TGA and see what that was all about. And to see people from all walks of life, all different ages, different levels in terms of their health and where they were at in their health journey. But everyone was there with the same goal, and that was to show the world that transplant works. But in 2020, that's when my health had gotten back down to the point where I was around 25% lung function. And that's when my doctors again said, Matt, I think it's time that we start talking about a redo. So that's the affectionate term that the Stanford team uses for a second double lung transplant. So in 2020, I was again added to the transplant list. This time I did wait a little bit longer. It wasn't 2.5 weeks like the first time. And so when was it? It was July 20th of 2020, I got the call that there was a donor for me again. So went to Stanford, had my second double lung transplant. This time the process wasn't quite as smooth. During the transplant, or during the process after the transplant, the surgery itself, everything went fine. But the morning after, I was in the ICU. I remember waking up the next morning, and my head, my face, my neck, everything had just swelled up. Ultimately found out that I had massive blood clots going on that were causing some problems. Fortunately, they were able to locate and isolate where those blood clots were. At the time, I had a Metaport, and there was just massive blood clotting that had started to occur around the port. So I went back into the OR for another surgery to remove that port and also extract all of the blood clotting that was going on. So fortunately, Stanford's such an amazing facility. I truly believe there's nothing they can't do. And at this point in time, the plan is to once again go back with Team USA and compete in Germany at the World Transplant Games. So I had mentioned that we launched our winery in 2012, not long after my first transplant, and things went really, really good. We decided initially just to do a cabernet Chardonnay, mainly because of the marketability, to be honest, of those two particular varietals. We know, Chardonnay and Cab are two of the most popular varietals that people tend to lean towards. And so we started with those two. We sold out very quickly. We really were just marketing and advertising our wines on Facebook at the time. I was connected to quite a few people in the CF community, and And a lot of people just love the concept and happen to love wine. And so we were getting hit up left and right for orders. And of course, we also had a launch party. Had quite a few people come to the launch party, had a lot of fun there, sold a lot of wine there. And so probably within the first 6 months, we were completely sold out of those first 2 varietals. And, of course, we decided to just keep growing from there. When you make wine, a lot of times winemakers will do what I like to affectionately call as bodybuilding. And that's just really to sort of kind of balance out the wine and or maybe add some characteristics to the wine to make a great wine even better. And so this particular wine, what we did some bodybuilding on it. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the label here, it's actually 96% Cabernet Sauvignon, but we added 2% Petit Verdot, 1% Cab Franc, and 1% Malbec. So very minimal amounts of some other varietals, but one of the things I love about winemaking is it's kind of like a chemistry class. Chemistry was one of my favorite subjects when I was in school. And so when you make wine, you're using beakers and pipettes and different things to measure out very meticulously specific amounts of like a Malbec, for instance, or a Cab Franc, for instance, and you add that to this and let's see how it affects it and what effect it has on the flavor. And when you taste wine, you kind of want to think of that taste almost like the shape of a football. It shouldn't just hit you, boom, super fast and then kind of die off quickly. You want it to kind of be a nice elongated feel, a good mouth feel. It should kind of sort of hit its peak. The flavor should kind of hit its peak in the mid palate and sort of very slowly and gradually kind of dissipate as you taste it and then swallow it. And so that's kind of the purpose of bodybuilding, is to kind of make it a more well-balanced wine that way. So the winery where we make our wine through a process called custom crush. And custom crush has become it's become much more of a popular thing here in wine country. And you can go to a custom crush facility, and there's quite a few, where you can go and you pay a fee and you can make or have their staff and their winemakers make wine for you. And so you can do it just for fun. You can do it commercially like we do. Even if you just wanted to produce a few cases to make as Christmas presents, for example, you could do that. But we choose to do this commercially so we can actually market our wine and sell our wine and produce much more of it. And you can do that through a custom crush facility, and it's nice because you don't have those overhead costs that are associated with owning your own land, or having to pay a vineyard management company, having to pay for all the equipment and maintenance of equipment that you have in an actual winery. You can roll up your sleeves and get as dirty as you want and get as involved in the process as you want, in terms of like the winemaking and the bottling and all of that stuff. And that's a lot of fun to do. Denise and I always have enjoyed doing that and being very involved. This wine, I'll kind of bring this to the front real quick, and we said quite a bit more on the back of this bottle. And this is one of my favorite wines that we've ever produced. Both of these here, this one and this one. So you can immediately see that these particular wines look a little bit different than the others. So this is our Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Franc is a really interesting varietal. It's really, really good, first of all, especially if you're a red wine drinker. But in the wine world, as I explained to you earlier, in the wine world, Cabernet Franc is abbreviated CF. As we know, cystic fibrosis is abbreviated CF. So over a glass of wine one night, Denise and I sort of had a light bulb moment where we were like, hey, we got to do something with that. we have to associate the two and produce a Cabernet Franc and do something with cystic fibrosis as well. So we basically came up with the idea to, first of all, call this, the name of this wine is the 65 Roses Cabernet Franc. I know most people in the CF world know the story of 65 Roses. But on top of that, we decided to call this CF for CF. And essentially on the back here, you can read a little blurb about my story with cystic fibrosis. As I mentioned earlier, a portion of our proceeds go to cystic fibrosis patients in one way, shape, or form. And so this is our 65 Roses bottle. And as you might imagine, you can see that this particular bottle has purple roses plastered all over it. And as you can guess, it is exactly 65 roses that are on this bottle, all around it, all over it. And it just turned out absolutely beautiful. We love the way that this bottle looks with all the roses all over it and our label on the front there. This one we decided to make our golden edition. This one comes from Stagecoach Vineyard, which I talked about a little bit earlier, and what an amazing vineyard that is. And the Cabernet Franc that comes from that vineyard is really, really good. So this is our golden edition for this Cab Franc. And so appropriately, we decided to make the roses these different shades of gold. But this is our Cab Franc, our 65 Roses Cab Franc. And this is why I like it. It's kind of a blend of creativity and science. And I'm a very creative guy. I'm artistic. I love to draw and to paint. And so I've always enjoyed, I kind of have that creative side of me as well. But I'm also a big science nerd. I will admit that. Like I said, I love chemistry and human anatomy and physiology and biology and, of course, enology as well, which is the science of winemaking. So it's kind of a nice blend of both worlds.